In a world that measures a man by the size of his bank account, what is the true worth of honor? One man had everything money could buy: power, influence, and the respect that came with it. The other had nothing but the quiet dignity earned through sacrifice on forgotten battlefields. Tonight, their two worlds were set to collide. The stage was a glittering charity gala, a night built to celebrate American heroes. But in the eyes of the powerful young CEO who owned the room, one of these heroes didn't belong. He was just an old man in a simple suit, a ghost from a bygone era. A problem to be handled, a demand was made, a line was crossed. But what they didn't know, what no one in that room could possibly imagine, was the story hidden on that old man's lapel. A story of unimaginable courage, a story of unbreakable promises, a story of honor so profound it could bring a 4-star general to an instant salute. They thought they were putting an old man in his place. They were about to learn a lesson in justice that would be one for the history books. The ballroom of the Grand Capitol Hotel in Washington, D.C. was a universe unto itself, glittering with a cold, perfect brilliance. This was the annual National Veterans Resilience Gala, an event that had become the city's premier spectacle of curated patriotism. The air, thick with the scent of expensive perfume and ambition, vibrated with the clinking of baccarat crystal and the low hum of powerful conversations. Waiters in crisp white jackets moved like phantoms through the crowd, balancing trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. On the surface, it was a tribute to the nation's warriors. But beneath the velvet ropes and the million-dollar floral arrangements, it was a battlefield of a different kind. A place of power plays, political maneuvering, and high-stakes branding. At the center of this universe was Blake Harrington. At 38, he was the king of his own creation, a tech billionaire who had built an empire on algorithms that predicted human behavior with chilling accuracy. He moved through the gala, not as a guest, but as a conqueror. His suit was tailored to perfection, his smile was a weapon, and his handshake was a transaction. He just ended a call, his voice a low, predatory growl that promised a hostile takeover for some unseen rival. "Make them bleed," he'd whispered into his phone before seamlessly turning to a news camera, his face instantly transforming into a mask of earnest philanthropy. "It's all about giving back," he declared, the camera lights glinting off his perfect teeth. "Our veterans are the bedrock of this nation, and it's our duty, my duty, to support them." His company, Harrington Dynamics, was the gala's lead sponsor, and his name was everywhere, on the banners, on the programs, on the lips of every politician in the room. He saw the event not as a tribute, but as an investment in his image, his brand, his legacy. Then, Arthur "Art" Donovan walked in. He entered not with a bang, but with a profound quiet that seemed to absorb the room's noise. At 78, he moved with the steady, deliberate pace of a man who was in no hurry, a man who had been to the edge of the world and back, and found no reason to rush. His suit was simple, dark, and well-kept, but it was decades old. He wore it not as a costume, but as a show of respect. He held no champagne flute. He sought no cameras. Instead, his eyes, the clear, pale blue of a winter sky, scanned the room, bypassing the senators and CEOs, and settling on a group of young Marines near the stage. One had a prosthetic leg, another bore the subtle scars of a burn on his neck. Art's gaze softened with a look of deep, knowing empathy. He was a ghost at this feast, a relic of a forgotten time, a lion in winter, invisible to the predators who prowled this gilded cage. He didn't want to be here. He felt the weight of the years, the ache in his joints that was a constant reminder of the damp jungles and cold nights of his youth. But he was here for Danny. His internal voice was a low murmur, a conversation he'd been having with himself for over 50 years. "Look at this place, Danny," he thought, a sad smile touching his lips. "You'd have gotten a real kick out of this. All these folks in their fancy clothes, talking about sacrifice. They wouldn't have lasted 10 seconds with us in the Ashau Valley." A flash of memory, so sharp it almost made him flinch. The sucking mud of the monsoon season, the constant drone of insects, the metallic taste of fear in his mouth, and Danny's face, young and grinning, right before their position was overrun. Art had made a promise to the dying boy, his platoon's radio man, that he would look out for his family. Danny's granddaughter was a recipient of the scholarship this gala funded. That was the only reason Art was here. It wasn't a choice. It was a duty, a promise to a ghost. Blake Harrington, standing at his VIP table, Table 1, the best in the house, surveyed his kingdom. And then he saw him. He saw Art. His eyes narrowed. In his world of curated perfection, Art was a glitch in the system. An old man in an old suit sitting alone at the most important table. Blake's mind processed the data with brutal efficiency. Unimportant, out of place, a problem. He didn't see a man. He saw a blemish on his perfect evening. He gestured impatiently, flagging down the event organizer, Colonel Rhett. Dr. Evelyn Reed. She was a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 50s, her posture as straight and unbending as the military career she'd left behind. "Evelyn," Blake said, his voice low but carrying the unmistakable weight of a command. He didn't even look at her, his eyes still fixed on Art. He made a dismissive gesture with his chin. "We have a situation at Table 1. Looks like someone wandered in from the general admission line. Can you please handle it?" The words were quiet, but they were an order. "We have an image to maintain." Blake Harrington thought he was solving a simple problem of aesthetics. He believed he was simply tidying up a minor social inconvenience, sweeping a piece of dust from his otherwise perfect picture. He had no idea he had just pulled the pin on a grenade of pure, unadulterated karma. He had no idea he had just aimed his entire world, all his money and all his power, at a man made of bedrock and steel. Dr. Evelyn Reed moved toward Table 1, her steps measured and her expression a mask of professional calm. As a retired Army colonel, she had navigated far more treacherous territory than a ballroom full of egos, but she could sense a brewing storm. She had seen men like Blake Harrington before, men who mistook the power of their checkbooks for the power of command. She reached Arthur Donovan's table and gave a slight, respectful nod. "Sergeant Major Donovan," she said, her voice clear but low. "It's a pleasure to have you with us. I hope you're being looked after." Art simply looked up and offered a small, genuine smile. "Everything is fine, Colonel, just fine." The title, Colonel, hung in the air for a moment. It was a sign of mutual respect, a shared language Blake couldn't possibly understand. Dr. Reed nodded again, turned, and walked back to where Blake was waiting, his foot tapping impatiently. "Mr. Harrington," she stated, her tone leaving no room for argument. "That is Sergeant Major Arthur Donovan. He is our primary guest of honor this evening. His seating is correct." Blake blinked. For a fraction of a second, his confident smirk faltered. This wasn't the expected result. He had anticipated a swift, obedient apology and the immediate removal of the old man. The gap between his expectation and the reality was a minor annoyance, a problem to be solved with more pressure. "Guest of honor?" he scoffed, recovering quickly. "Evelyn, I am the one who made this night possible. My donation funded half of your programs for the year, and I am telling you, he doesn't look the part." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hiss. "Frank Vogel over there." He gestured with his head toward a portly man in a shimmering suit. "Is the CEO of Aerotech. I'm in the middle of acquiring his company. I need to project strength, success. Having this relic sitting at the head table looks like we're running a soup kitchen. It's bad optics. Now, I am asking you again. Move him, or I'll have a conversation with the board about your suitability as this organization's director." It was a direct threat, power versus protocol, but Dr. Reed's spine, forged through 30 years of military service, didn't bend. "Sir, with all due respect, the seating arrangement was approved by the Pentagon itself. Sergeant Major Donovan is at that table for a very specific reason. I cannot move him." "However," she added, a flicker of ice in her eyes, "if you are uncomfortable, I would be happy to find you another seat." The insult was magnificent in its subtlety. It sent a surge of hot fury through Blake's veins. He had been dismissed. He, Blake Harrington, had been dismissed by a woman he considered his employee, on behalf of a man he considered a nobody. His jaw tightened. Fine. If she wouldn't handle it, he would. As Blake stewed, fuming and plotting his next move, the narrative of the room shifted. At table 1, Art Donovan was leaning forward, engaged in a quiet conversation with a young Marine Lance Corporal named Miller, who had lost a leg in a recent overseas conflict. Miller looked tense, his eyes darting around the opulent room, clearly uncomfortable. "It's a lot to take in, isn't it?" Art said softly, his voice a low rumble. Miller nodded, not meeting his eyes. I feel like an animal in a zoo, sir." Art chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "I know the feeling, son. My first year back from Vietnam, I went to a grocery store. A real one. So many choices, so many colors. People complaining about the price of lettuce. I stood in an aisle for 10 minutes, just staring at a wall of cereal boxes, and I started sweating. Felt like the walls were closing in. I turned around, walked out, and didn't go back for a month." He paused, looking at the young Marine with a kind of gentle understanding that felt ancient. "You see, the world keeps moving, son. It forgets. But the things you learn over there, about who you can count on, about what really matters, that stuff doesn't change. The uniform comes off, but the honor stays inside. That's the one thing they can never take from you. You carry it yourself." Miller looked up, a flicker of gratitude in his young eyes. For the first time that night, he seemed to relax. It was at that exact moment of quiet connection that Blake Harrington chose to strike. He strode to the table, his expensive shoes silent on the thick carpet, his shadow falling over the two men. He bypassed the young Marine, his focus entirely on Art. He clapped a heavy, patronizing hand on Art's shoulder. "Hey there, old-timer." Blake's voice boomed, loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear, a calculated performance of dominance. "Looks like you got a little lost. This table is for our major partners, the people who actually make this night happen." He smiled a wide, predatory smile, reaching into his jacket. "But don't you worry. Let me find you a more appropriate seat with the rest of the guys." He pulled out a thick money clip, the gold gleaming under the chandeliers. With a dramatic flourish, he peeled off 5 $100 bills and tossed them onto the table in front of Art. "Here," he said, his voice dripping with false charity, "for your trouble. Why don't you go enjoy the buffet? On me." The room, which had been a symphony of chatter, fell into a stunning, absolute silence. Every eye turned to table 1. The news camera, which had been filming a politician, swung around, its red recording light a single, baleful eye. Dr. Reed froze halfway across the room, her face a mask of disbelief. In that moment, Blake Harrington thought he was putting an old man in his place. He thought he was demonstrating the power of his wealth. But what he was really doing was standing on a landmine of his own design, and the whole world was about to watch it detonate. The silence in the ballroom was a physical thing. It was heavier than the crystal chandeliers, thicker than the velvet curtains. All that could be heard was the faint, almost imperceptible hum of the air conditioning. Blake Harrington stood there, a smug, expectant smile plastered on his face, the $500 lying on the white tablecloth like a gauntlet thrown down. He had done it. He had publicly asserted his dominance, and now he waited for the old man to scurry away in shame. Arthur Donovan didn't move. He didn't look at the money. He didn't look at the crowd. He simply raised his eyes and looked directly at Blake Harrington. There was no anger in his gaze. There was no fear. There was just a deep, profound, and soul-crushingly sad disappointment. That quiet gaze, more than any shout, seemed to unnerve Blake. His smile tightened at the edges. This is the moment that defines a person, not the moments of triumph, but the moments of pressure, of confrontation. We've all seen bullies like this, haven't we? People who use their power, their position, or their wealth to belittle others. Let us know in the comments if you've ever witnessed a moment where someone got exactly what they deserved. The story of what happens next is why you're here. Dr. Reed started to move forward, her face grim, ready to intervene. But she was too late. Someone else was already moving. General Mark Peterson, the four-star general serving as the Secretary of Defense and the night's keynote speaker, had been in a conversation with two senators. He had seen the commotion out of the corner of his eye. Now, he saw clearly who was at the center of it. His conversation stopped mid-sentence. His entire demeanor shifted. The genial politician vanished, and a soldier took his place. He moved with a purpose that parted the crowd like the Red Sea. He strode past the gawking donors, past the frozen waitstaff, his eyes locked on table 1. He walked right up to Blake Harrington, brushed past him as if he were a piece of furniture, and came to a halt directly in front of Arthur Donovan. In the dead, silent room, the sound of the general's heels clicking together on the marble floor was like a rifle shot. He drew himself up to his full height, his back ramrod straight, and executed the sharpest, most profound salute of his life. It was a gesture of pure, unadulterated respect, a tribute from one of the most powerful men in the country to the quiet old man sitting before him. "Sergeant Major Donovan." The general's voice boomed, ringing with an emotion that no one in the room had expected. It was a voice used to commanding armies, but now it was filled with something akin to reverence. "Forgive me. I did not realize you would be gracing us with your presence. It is a profound honor to be in this room with you, sir." The word "sir," from a four-star general to a retired sergeant major, sent a ripple of shock through the military personnel in the audience. Blake Harrington just stood there, his mouth slightly agape, the smug look replaced by one of utter confusion. The general lowered his salute, but kept his eyes on Art. Then, slowly, he turned his head, his gaze falling upon Blake Harrington. The warmth in his eyes vanished, replaced by a cold, hard fury that could freeze fire. He pointed a single steady finger, not at Art's face, but at the lapel of his simple, dark suit. "Mr. Harrington." The general's voice was low now, a dangerous growl that carried across the silent room. "You see that? That small, inconspicuous light blue pin on this man's lapel? The one you probably didn't even notice while you were throwing your money around? He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. That is the Medal of Honor. A collective gasp went through the room. It was an audible, physical reaction. The news camera zoomed in, first on the small star-studded pin, then on Blake's face, as the blood drained from it. But the general wasn't finished. He was going to educate him. In the spring of 1968, he continued, his voice now a powerful narrative that commanded the attention of everyone. During the siege of Khe Sanh, then Staff Sergeant Donovan's platoon was ambushed and completely overrun. For 12 straight hours, while wounded by shrapnel in his leg and his shoulder, this man moved through a storm of open fire, dragging his wounded men to cover one by one. When his position was about to be taken, he ordered his men to fall back, and he alone held off 3 separate enemy assaults with nothing but a machine gun and a will of iron. He was found the next morning, unconscious, next to his weapon, surrounded by the bodies of the enemy. But his men were safe. The general took a step closer to Blake. The man you just offered money to, the man you just called Grandpa, is not a guest of honor because he's a victim. He is a guest of honor because he is a living legend. He is a national treasure. The silence was broken by a single person clapping, then another and another. Within seconds, the entire ballroom erupted in a thunderous, roaring, sustained ovation. It wasn't the polite applause from earlier. This was a wave of genuine, overwhelming respect. Every service member in the room, from the young lance corporal at Art's table to the colonels and admirals scattered throughout the crowd, was on their feet, their applause deafening. They weren't clapping for a medal. They were clapping for the man. Blake Harrington stood frozen in the middle of it all, a statue of humiliation. The camera flashes were blinding, each one a nail in the coffin of his reputation. He saw his international business rival, Mr. Vogel, give a slow, deliberate shake of his head in disgust before turning and walking away. A Medal of Honor isn't just a piece of metal and ribbon. It's a story, paid for in a currency of blood and courage, that men like Blake Harrington could never comprehend. And he had just made himself the villain in one of the most heroic stories in the room. The aftermath was not a slow decay. It was a digital wildfire, an instantaneous inferno that consumed Blake Harrington's curated world. The video clip, stripped of all context except for the raw, brutal truth of the moment, became a weapon. It wasn't just a story. It was a verdict, delivered by millions of unseen jurors in the court of public opinion. Before Blake's car had even cut through the city traffic, the shockwaves were already circling the globe. His phone, a device he had used to build and command his empire, was now the harbinger of his ruin, vibrating with a relentless, hateful energy. Headlines materialized on screens from New York to London to Tokyo, each one a nail in his coffin. Tech mogul's philanthropy, a sham. Harrington humiliates hero. Veterans groups demand global boycott of Harrington Dynamics after shocking gala video. The stock ticker for his company, a symbol of his genius and power, became a river of red, plunging in pre-market trading as panicked investors fled the toxicity of his name. Billions in value, built over a decade of ruthless ambition, evaporated in a matter of hours. The empire of data he had so masterfully built was now turning on its creator, analyzing him, judging him, and finding him wanting. The calls began just after midnight. First, the panicked chief financial officer, then the furious head of PR, and finally, the ice-cold chairman of the board. The language was corporate, sterile, and utterly final. Unacceptable brand exposure. Fiduciary duty to shareholders. a voluntary separation to pursue other interests. It was a clinical execution. He wasn't being fired. He was being surgically excised from the body of his own creation, a cancer that had to be cut out before it killed the host. But back at the gala, as the last of the guests departed, Arthur Donovan was experiencing a different kind of aftermath. He found himself in a spotlight he had spent a lifetime avoiding. A desperate reporter, sensing the biggest story of the night, finally pushed through the thinning crowd of well-wishers, her microphone extended like a weapon. "Sergeant Major Donovan," she called out, her voice sharp. "An incredible moment tonight. How does it feel to have put a man like Blake Harrington in his place? It's a victory for the little guy, isn't it?" Art looked at the reporter, and in her eager eyes, he saw the same dangerous simplification he had seen in Blake Harrington. She wanted a simple story, a clean narrative of good versus evil, David versus Goliath. She wanted to frame him as a victor in a petty squabble. And Art, in that moment, made a choice. He refused to play the part. "Victory?" he said, his voice quiet but carrying an immense weight that cut through the noise. "Son, I've seen what victory looks like. It doesn't look like this. It doesn't feel like this." He looked past her, his gaze finding the young Marine, Lance Corporal Miller, who was watching from a distance. There was no victory here tonight, just a sad misunderstanding. That young man made a mistake. He has to live with that. That's punishment enough. The reporter was taken aback, fumbling for a follow-up. "But sir, he disrespected you. He disrespected the medal." Art's eyes hardened slightly. "He disrespected himself," he corrected her gently. The medal is fine. It's been through a lot worse than a rich man's bad manners." He then did something masterful. He deflected. "You want to talk about heroes? Talk to that young man over there." He nodded towards Miller. "Ask him what it's like to come home to a world that doesn't understand. Ask him about the buddies he lost. Their stories are more important than this one." He gave a final polite nod and turned away, leaving the reporter with a story far more complex and profound than the simple takedown she had been looking for. He had refused to be defined by his conflict with Blake. He would only be defined by his service to others. He found a quiet corner, hoping for a moment of peace. But Dr. Reed found him there, holding 2 cups of black coffee. She handed one to him. "I figured you could use this, Sergeant Major." He took it, his hands wrapping around the warmth of the cup. "Thank you, Colonel." They stood in silence for a moment. 2 old soldiers in a world that no longer spoke their language. "It's heavy, isn't it?" she finally said, her voice soft, carrying that honor. Art stared into his coffee, the dark liquid reflecting the ballroom's fading lights. He was silent for so long that Dr. Reed thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick, with an emotion he rarely showed. "The medal isn't for the man who wears it, Colonel," he said, his voice cracking ever so slightly. "It's a placeholder. It's for the men who can't be here to receive one themselves. It's their award. I'm just the keeper." He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket, the same pocket where Blake assumed he kept nothing of value. He pulled out a worn, dark brown leather wallet, the sides softened and curved from decades of being carried close to his heart. From a hidden flap, he carefully extracted a small yellowed piece of paper. It was folded into a tiny square, the creases so deep they were almost transparent. He unfolded it with the reverence of a priest handling a sacred text. On the paper was a list of names, written in faded blue ink. Danny Peterson. He read the first name, his voice a low whisper. "My radio man, kid from Ohio. Talked about baseball nonstop. He's the one who called in the airstrike that saved the rest of us. He did it while he was bleeding out in my arms." He traced the next name with his fingertip. "Jimmy Riley, machine gunner from Boston. Funniest man I ever knew. He drew all the fire so we could pull the wounded back. Never flinched." His voice caught. "Hector Gonzalez, our medic. A quiet boy from a small town in Texas. He ran out of supplies, so he used his own shirt to try and stop the bleeding for another man. He was killed while shielding that man's body with his own." He looked up at Dr. Reed, and for the first time, she saw the true weight he carried. His eyes were not the eyes of a victor, but of a survivor, a witness. "The medal isn't heavy, Colonel," he said, his voice now clear and strong. "But the names are. The names are very heavy. I wear this for them, so that someone, somewhere, still remembers their names." As Blake Harrington was being dismantled by the world he built, undone by the very image he worshipped, Arthur Donovan was reaffirming the source of his own unbreakable strength. It wasn't in a medal, it was in a promise. It wasn't in public glory, but in private memory. His honor was not a shield to protect him, but a torch to carry for the fallen. And that was a fire that no amount of money or disgrace could ever extinguish. The final reckoning for Blake Harrington was not a battle. It was an implosion. His world, once a glittering fortress of wealth and influence, collapsed inward, leaving nothing but a hollow shell. He delivered his public apology from a boardroom that felt like a tomb, the mahogany table reflecting his pale, haunted face. He spoke of a profound misjudgment, of a journey of learning, but the words were empty, crafted by a crisis management team and delivered without a flicker of genuine remorse. The world saw it for what it was: the desperate maneuvering of a defeated king. The video of his apology went viral for all the wrong reasons, becoming a new meme for corporate insincerity. Days later, the announcement came. Blake Harrington was stepping down as CEO. He was not just a pariah, he was a ghost, haunting the ruins of his own life, a man who had everything and was now defined by the one thing he had lost: respect. His empire of image had been shattered by an image. His legacy, once destined for the annals of business magazines, was now reduced to a 30-second clip of his own spectacular failure. For Arthur Donovan, the aftermath was a different kind of storm. The quiet solitude of his workshop, once his sanctuary, was now besieged by the noise of the outside world. The phone rang incessantly. News vans parked on his quiet suburban street. He was offered book deals, television interviews, and speaking fees that could have paid off his mortgage 100 times over. He refused it all. He had not sought the spotlight. He had been thrust into it, and he wanted nothing more than to retreat back into the shadows, back to the familiar company of his memories and the scent of sawdust. He was a soldier, not a celebrity. The war was over. He just wanted to go home. But the world, it seemed, had other plans. A week after the gala, a large box arrived at his door. It was from Dr. Reed. Inside, there were no awards, no plaques, no checks. There were only letters, stacks of them bundled together with twine. Hundreds. He spent an entire afternoon reading them, the silence of his home filled with the whispered voices of strangers. They were from school children who had seen the video in class, from parents who used his story to teach their kids about respect, from CEOs of other companies who wrote to say he had inspired them to rethink their own leadership. And they were from soldiers. Dozens of letters from young men and women on military bases around the world. They all said some version of the same thing. Thank you. Thank you for showing us what honor looks like. Near the bottom of the pile, he found a letter written on simple notebook paper. He recognized the name instantly. Lance Corporal Miller, the young Marine from the gala. Sergeant Major, the letter began. I have to be honest. I was getting out. I put in my papers last month. I came home from my last tour and the world just didn't make sense anymore. I felt angry all the time. Lost. Like you said, I felt like a ghost. I came to that gala because my CO ordered me to, but I hated every second of it. I felt like a prop. Then Mr. Harrington did what he did, and I watched you. You didn't get angry. You didn't even flinch. You just looked at him. And in that one look, I saw more strength than I've ever seen in my life. You taught me that the mission isn't over when you take the uniform off. You taught me that honor is something you carry inside you every day. Sir, I've withdrawn my separation papers. I'm staying in. I want to become a man my Marines can look up to, the way I look up to you. Art folded the letter slowly, his weathered hands trembling slightly. He looked around his quiet workshop, at the ghosts of the past he had lived with for so long. And he understood. A soldier's duty is never truly done. A new mission had just found him. The final chapter of Arthur Donovan's story was not written in boardrooms or on television screens. It was written in high school auditoriums, on dusty parade grounds at military bases, and in community centers in small towns across America. He accepted one speaking invitation, then another. He never took a fee. His only request was that a portion of the ticket sales, if any, go to a local veterans support charity. His speeches were not what people expected. He rarely spoke of combat, and he never spoke of his own medal. He spoke about something simpler and infinitely more complex. He spoke of his 3 C's. The first C is courage, he would tell a gymnasium full of wide-eyed JROTC cadets, his voice a low, steady rumble that commanded absolute attention. And courage isn't about being fearless. I can tell you right now, in 50 years of life, I've been afraid almost every single day. Courage is being terrified and still doing your duty. It's about putting one foot in front of the other when every part of you is screaming to run away. It's the simplest and hardest thing in the world. The second C is commitment, he'd say, his eyes scanning the crowd. It's a promise to the person standing next to you that you will not let them down. It's finishing the job, seeing it through to the end, not because it's easy, but because you said you would. In a world that changes its mind every 5 minutes, commitment is bedrock. But the last C, he would pause, letting his words sink in. The most important one is character. Character is who you are when no one is watching. It's what you do when you think you can get away with it. You can have all the courage and commitment in the world, but if you don't have character, you have nothing. It's the moral compass that guides you through the darkest nights. It's the choice between what is easy and what is right. His final scene does not take place in front of a crowd. It takes place at dusk, at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. The air is cool and still. He walks along the polished black granite wall, a long dark scar on the landscape of the city, a mirror reflecting the world of the living and the world of the dead. His steps are slow, deliberate. He knows this path by heart. He stops. His hand, wrinkled and scarred, reaches out and gently, lovingly traces the letters carved into the stone. DANIELPETERSON. He pulls a small, crisp American flag from his jacket pocket and wedges it firmly into a crack in the granite, a silent tribute to the boy from Ohio who loved baseball. He stands there for a long time, a silent sentinel, as the last rays of sun disappear behind the Lincoln Memorial. He is not a hero. He is a keeper of promises, a guardian of memory. In the end, Blake Harrington learned the brutal lesson that you can't buy respect, and you can't bully honor. His legacy is a cautionary tale, a viral moment of shame that will live forever in the cold, unforgiving memory of the internet. But Arthur Donovan reminded us of a timeless, powerful truth. A person's legacy is not measured by the size of their fortune, but by the strength of their character. His greatest victory wasn't won in the jungles of a foreign land, but in a quiet moment of integrity that inspired a nation. And his honor, forged in the crucible, was and always will be unassailable. In the quiet dusk of Washington, D.C., as a lone veteran touched a name carved in stone, a story came to an end. But it also just began. What truly defines a man's legacy? Is it the noise he makes in the world, the size of the empire he builds, or is it the quiet echo of his character, long after the noise has faded? Blake Harrington had everything, and in one evening, he lost the only thing that mattered. His legacy became a viral clip, a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms about the dangers of arrogance. He wasn't destroyed by a loss of money, but by a moment of truth. He was left a ghost in his own life, haunted by an image of his own making. But Arthur Donovan's story is a different kind of lesson. The events of that night didn't give him his honor. They simply revealed it to the world. He sought no victory. He claimed no prize. He simply stood his ground on a foundation that had been forged half a century earlier in the jungles of Quezon. His life teaches us a profound truth. Honor isn't loud. It isn't found in the spotlight or on the front page. It's the quiet integrity you carry when the world isn't looking. It's the promise you keep to a fallen friend. It's the strength to be humble in a world that rewards boasting. This story wasn't just about a billionaire and a veteran. It was about the collision of two Americas, one that builds with steel and glass, and one that was built on sacrifice and grit. It reminds us that sometimes justice isn't delivered in a courtroom. It's delivered in a moment of clarity that simply reveals people for who they have been all along. True strength, as Sergeant Major Donovan showed us, isn't about never being knocked down. It's about what you choose to build when you get back up. He turned an unwanted spotlight into a beacon of mentorship. He transformed a moment of disrespect into a lifetime of renewed purpose, ensuring that the lessons of his generation, lessons of courage, commitment, and character, would not be forgotten. In our own lives, we face our own battles. We see echoes of this story everywhere. We see the quiet heroes and the loud pretenders. Arthur Donovan's story is a call to remember what is real and what is lasting. It asks us to look for the honor that exists all around us, in the people who don't ask for applause. They are our fathers, our grandfathers, our neighbors. They are the quiet heroes living among us, carrying the names of their friends in their hearts. Their legacy is the very fabric of this nation. If these stories matter to you, if you believe in honoring this legacy of sacrifice and character, then join our community. Your voice makes a difference. Like this video to show your respect. Share it to spread this powerful message. And please, subscribe to NX Incredible Stories so we can continue to ensure these vital stories are told and that the heroes who lived them are never, ever forgotten. Thank you for watching, and thank you for remembering.